have a confession to make. I've never seen Snowfall. I know. I'll wait for y'all to drag me. Okay, are we good now? Good. Because I just watched the pilot for the first time and it was pretty fire, and I want to break it down for you. I started analyzing this one on my own time. I didn't even go into it knowing that I was going to post this. It's a great lesson in so many ways, in ensemble storytelling, how all the storylines just dovetails, meets each other at key moments, the way all of it is so thematically tied together. But it's also a really good lesson in what we hope to achieve in terms of character arc in a pilot, which is just the change of how a character starts and ends. And that is the backbone of storytelling. So I want to go into further detail with you about how to craft a really compelling character arc using Franklin in the pilot of Snowfall as an example. Franklin is going from this everyday regular street hustler to he's going to the big leagues. That is the external change. That is what he's actively going after in terms of concrete externalized goal. But internally, we know that he really just wants freedom. He wants to be able to do what he wants when he wants. And that's actually the words that he said in the pilot. The internal change, or the spiritual change as I'll call it, is that we're seeing a person with no freedom, or believes that he has no freedom, to attaining true freedom, or his definition of it at least. So I just wrote the arc up there quickly. He's going from no freedom to freedom, and then from a street hustler to a boss. Now in this episode, Franklin has 11 beats. So I went ahead and labeled the beats 1 through 11, and the general structure of any arc is that the last beat is where the character completes the arc. Now for a TV show, our arcs actually are supposed to last the entire series, but they're set up in the pilot. So he's not going to complete it fully at the end of the episode, since it's just the first episode. It's going to take a long time, but he has to be on his way. So since we know that Franklin's goal is to achieve freedom, and the only way that he believes that you can achieve freedom is by being a boss, we know that his last beat has to be he's on his way to achieving freedom and to becoming a boss. The way that you structure the first beat is that it is in direct opposition of the last beat. So if he wants to achieve freedom, his starting point has to be he doesn't have freedom. So I just wrote freedomless there because we know that's going to be his starting point. And then in the middle, somewhere around beat 6 or 7, is gonna be his decision to change. That's where the character decides to do something that literally changes the course of their life, and it leads them towards arcing towards where they want to go. Okay, so now let's break this down even further, because we need to know what the structure is for the beats before the decision to change and afterwards. So before the decision to change, all of these beats, the purpose of them is usually exposition, but the exposition is geared towards why the character wants to change in order for the audience to buy their decision to change. So there's different reasons why we believe why the character would make such a crazy decision and change the entire course of their life, but it all needs to be set up here so that we're able to believe that the character is capable of making such a decision. So all of this is gonna be expo. And then after the decision to change is going to come obstacles. There are going to be obstacles standing in the way of the character's goal. Now that they've decided this is what I want to do, this is what I want to go after, it can't come easy, right? Or else they didn't earn the arc. The only way that a character can earn an arc is by meeting an obstacle and overcoming it. That's what's going to happen after the decision to change, until we get to the end where they have overcome the obstacle and then completed their arc. So now that we've got the structural foundation, here's what that looks like in terms of the actual scenes in the pilot of Snowfall. So here we know that Franklin is freedomless. And the way that they showed that in the pilot of Snowfall is through the opening scene. When we first meet Franklin, the first thing that he's doing is he is stopping neighborhood kids from stealing from the ice cream truck. He says it's important that they learn that America doesn't work that way. Essentially, you don't get to just do what you want to do whenever you want to do it. America is freedomless. That's his philosophy, which is, as we said, in direct opposition of what he wants and where he's about to go. Moving on to beat 2, where we're going to get some exposition about who he is, the world around him, his environment, his friends, and it's all going to be building up all the different characteristics that make him capable of making this decision here. So his second beat, Franklin is at a wrestling match and the wrestler that he's rooting for loses. So even though the wrestler didn't win, Franklin still wants his autograph. What does that tell us? It tells us that he roots for underdogs and people who want to fight. Why? Because that's who he is. That's who he identifies with, right? He's an underdog with a dream of winning in America. And the way that he believes that he'll win and beat America is by achieving freedom. Now, in the third beat, this is where Franklin gets more weed to sell from his uncle. hustle. And we find out that he's keeping this a secret from his mom, that he's a street hustler. This is important because it shows that he's a person who's capable of making that leap to the big leagues at the end, because he's not a goody two-shoes. Yes, he stopped them from stealing in the beginning, but now we're realizing that that's simply because he doesn't want other people to get in trouble, right? He's willing to do the things that nobody wants to do or that people shouldn't do, just so other people don't have to do it. He's willing to take the risk. And so we can add that to his characteristics. He believes that America isn't fair, that it's freedomless, that you have to fight to win freedom, and he's a risk taker. So that means he's ready for that fight and he'll do what it takes. Also important later. Now in beat 4, Franklin witnesses a couple of things here, but the main thing is that Franklin is seeing his mom stressed out. For example, he realizes that somebody put their hands on her because she has a ripped piece of clothing, but there's nothing that he can do about any of her issues, financial and otherwise. So he tells her to rest in the scene. That's what he wants overall. He wants his mom to rest, but he cannot provide that for her. So expositionally, this is showing us that his character feels powerless. He's powerless in his environment, his family, and you have to keep that in mind because that is a big reason for someone to change. Then in Franklin's next beat, he takes his friend Leon on a little road trip where he's gonna drop some weed off to a buyer. Turns out the buyer is someone that he went to school with, an old classmate, and this classmate is wealthy, rich, lives in a mansion, there's a huge house party, and Leon realizes, you've never talked about this. Franklin has 2 different lives where he knows these extremely wealthy people, but he lives in poverty and he doesn't let them mix usually. And while Leon says, oh, you're being secretive, you're keeping all this from the homies, what it should register in your brain is that Franklin is capable of living a double life. He already does it. He can exist in one world and exist in another and be 2 completely different people. He has the capacity for that. And that is exactly what being a boss, like a drug dealer mob boss, that's exactly what that would require. And he is demonstrating that he has the capabilities of it from here. Very important, especially as we're inching closer to that decision. And in Franklin's 6th beat, here's where we actually kind of get, I don't even know what to call it right now, I guess like a mission statement, basically. Like, I'm Franklin, here's what I want, and here's what you're gonna watch me do in this show. He literally announces to the audience, I like working, I like getting paid, I like money. And what I'm after is freedom from everything. And we know what everything is because we've seen it already. So we know exactly what he means. That's basically him saying, I'm ready to change now. I will also note that he does mention a little bit about he's been learning the business side of things. That also comes into play later. But this is the main thing. I want freedom. And now we've made it to the decision to change, which is beat 7, which is where it should go, right in the middle. Franklin is hanging out with that really wealthy, rich friend that we met in beat 5, the one from his other life. And while they're hanging out at the mansion at the party, his friend says, oh, I'm out of Coke. Can you help me get some? Franklin doesn't sell Coke, but he says, I can go to my parents' dealer. It's just the guy is crazy and I'm afraid to get it from him. And again, we've already established that Franklin is the person who's willing to do what others won't. And so he says, yeah, I'll get it from the guy. So Franklin goes in there. It's scary. Someone's been shot. There's a whole, watch the scene. Watch the scene. It's a mess. But what ends up happening is that the guy tells him, the dealer tells him, I don't sell small amounts of Coke. I sell kilos. And so Franklin takes that opportunity to say, front me a key and I'll flip it and give you the money. Insane. No one asked him to do that. It was his decision as a character to take the risk. All of these things that we've established so far are coming into play here so that we can buy that he's gonna do something this insane. And a whole lot happens, watch the scene, but basically the guy gives him the kilo and says, you have 1 day, which is the obstacle. I will also note that Franklin talking his way into getting this key and convincing this guy to do this thing that makes no sense. It's like, trust this stranger to flip a kilo of cocaine and deliver $12,000 in 1 day. Franklin had to talk himself into that, right? He used his own superpower of making a deal, of convincing this guy that it's in his best interest to trust him. Again, that will come up later. So now Franklin gets the key. He has 1 day to flip it. And so characters always do the easiest thing first when they're faced with an obstacle. And the easiest thing for him to do is go to his uncle. His uncle says no. So that beat ends in failure. And that is important because honestly, if you do not earn your way to the arc, it's not gonna feel satisfying for the audience. So the first thing that he has to try, especially the easiest thing, it has to be met in failure so that he can pivot, get out of his comfort zone, do something else. And what does he end up doing? His aunt, who overheard his conversation with his uncle, knows someone that he can sell the drugs to. So she offers to take him and he accepts. Now, it was dangerous to accept this offer, but again, risk taker, and at this point, his life is on the line. And so now we have this entire sequence where he's introduced to the buyer named Claudia. Things are seemingly fine, and then things go south pretty quickly. Claudia hits the aunt and then puts a gun to Franklin's head. And once again, he uses his superpower to get out of it. He appeals to her self-interest. They can both make money, stay alive, and he'll bring her more tomorrow if she pays up, and then they can have a working relationship. Now, what's crazy is that he made another promise that he doesn't know if he can keep. But again, that's been established. That's the type of person that he is. And he was able to overcome the obstacle and get the money in that scene with Claudia. Now, the money that he just made is the most money that he's ever made. And so not only did he overcome the obstacle, like I said before, him overcoming the obstacle is actually putting him on the path to complete his overall arc. And so his episodic arc is complete now because he flipped the key, he got 12K plus more, and the story is just getting started. He's on his way to accomplishing his goal of freedom, not knowing that this type of lifestyle is an even bigger trap than he realizes, which I think is so interesting. He thinks that this life is going to give him freedom, but it's actually going to make him feel more trapped. So interesting. Like I said, I know I'm late, but now I just have all the episodes to binge, so I'm going to continue watching.